Hello, I'm Mrs H. You can find my patterns at www.mrs-h.com. In today's video we're going to be sewing the midi bag. I absolutely love this pattern and I hope you will too. So I've got two different versions here to show you. It comes in one size only. It's a structured bag. I like to wear mine crossbody, but you can wear yours on your shoulder. You can adjust the strap however you like. On the front we've got this wonderful large flap and it's fastened with two magnetic snaps, and underneath we've got these 3D cargo pockets. So I'll show you how to do those in the pattern, talk you through how to do those. The bag has got box corners and then the top closure has got a recessed zip. Let me close that so you can see. Got a recessed zip in the top there. And then inside we've got a zip pocket and also a slip pocket. I've done mine in a contrast colour so that you can see it in there. And then the instructions in the pattern talk you through dividing that slip pocket into a pen pocket and a couple of other different sizes. You've got quite a nice long tail on the zip, so you can open this bag up nice and wide. The back panel is just plain, although you could, if you wanted to, do two front panels and have exactly the same on the back. And then the strap, the instructions in the strap, in the pattern show you how to do this. The strap is pieced, so you've got two different fabrics. I've got my exterior and my lining fabric, and we've used those to piece the strap together, which just gives you a really fun feature on this bag. My red one is exactly the same. In fact, I've used the same lining fabric for this one as well. Let me pop this on or hold it against me so you can see what size it is. I think that's a good size bag. We've called it the midi bag because it's a good medium size bag. I think you could do this in a lot of different fabrics. You could do it in a gender neutral fabric. So that's it on my shoulder. I'll move that red one out of the way so you can see. And then it would be exactly the same crossbody. I'll lengthen the strap out. We've got a nice long strap on this one. So you can wear it over your bulky coat, or you can wear it lower down if you want to. And it'll also suit those who are slightly taller than me because I'm not blessed with height. So that's the length of the strap if you want to lengthen it to full size. I'm only 5'1", so I'm not blessed with height, unfortunately. Right, so this, I absolutely love this pattern and I think you will as well. It's fairly simple, but there's a lot of elements to it. So I'm going to talk you through how to do everything in the pattern during this tutorial. So gather all your supplies together and let's get started. Right, so the first thing we need to do is baste our flap onto our foam. All you need to do is get your piece of foam. I've cut mine slightly bigger. Just smooth it out, and then I'm going to pin in the corner. So I'm going to pin in this top corner first, and then I'm going to smooth out in the opposite direction, and then pin in this bottom corner, and then smooth into this top corner, and then into the opposite bottom corner, and pin there as well. Okay. Might just add a pin in the middle as well, just to be sure. And I'm going to baste at 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, because my seam allowance on my pattern is 3/8 inch or 1 centimetre. So this will make the basting stitches just inside the seam line. So I've increased my stitch length to my longest stitch length that I've got, and I'm just going to sew all the way around. Right, now we can take these pins out. We're going to trim the excess foam away from the edges. We're only doing the flap at the moment. We'll come back and do the foam on the main bodies later on, but we're just doing the flap for the minute. Okay, so all I've done is I've turned this over and I'm holding my scissors at an angle, and I'm just trimming this extra foam away from the seam line. That just helps to reduce the bulk that's going to go through your machine, and also reduces the bulk that's going to be in your seam line as well. So hopefully your seams will sit nice and flat. Okay, there we go. Well, I've managed to trim my extra threads without intending to, so that's good. Right, so this one can go to one side for now. That flap, we'll come back to that later. And then we are going to get our F zip top and extension piece. You only need 2 of these at the moment, so you should have 3 altogether, but you're only going to use 2 just right now. And we're going to transfer the marks from this pattern piece. So I'm just making a little snip and lay it on your pattern piece there. Just transfer that mark, and we're transferring them onto the right side. I'm also going to add a pin into mine because my fabric is not quite not so easy to see that mark very well. So just to be sure, adding a pin as well. Okay, so that's one. We'll do the same on the other side. So all I've done is I've flipped this over for the other half. Transfer that little marking and then line this up. And I'm using chalk. You want to use something that you're not going to see. So if you're using a pen, make sure that it washes away, or you can rub it away or iron it off something afterwards. You should be doing it just in the seam allowance, but I've done mine slightly bigger so that you can see where they are. Okay, so the zip tops, they can go to one side for now, and we'll come back to those when we do the top closure on the bag. Okay, so we are all ready and prepared, and we can get started on our zip pocket now. So what you're going to need is your zip pocket facing and one lining panel. Get my other pocket pieces here. We've got one lining panel and one zip pocket facing. Now my fabric is quite busy, so I will make sure that I am showing you every single step of the way. Now first thing we want to do is mark our centres, so we make sure that everything is nice and lined up, nice and even. Now these centre marks are also going to help with the final construction and adding your zip top and things like that, so don't skip this thinking you can just sort of eyeball it, because you're going to need these centre marks later on as well. Change over to a pencil. There we go. Pencil never fails, does it? Right, I'm also going to put those on the right side just so that I can see where I am. Hopefully that's over a dark green leaf. I'll put a pin in there. And then on the right side at the bottom, oh, nearly on a dark green leaf, but we're okay. And then mark the centre on my zip pocket facing as well. And then we can line that up evenly. Right, so we are going to place this. Let's have a look. Oh, hang on, we need to draw our box first before we put it on. So we're going to draw our box 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetres from each long edge. Let's do that first. I'm going to do it with my pencil so that you can see, but please do use something that you're not going to see. It's not going to bleed through your fabric on your one. Okay, so 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetres from each long edge. So that should give us a box that is 3/8 of an inch high, or 1 centimetre high. Yep. And then we're going to draw a line 1 inch away from each short end. So the box we have drawn should be approximately 9 inches long, or 23 centimetres. Looks pretty much near enough for me. Okay, so we'll get our lining panel, and we're going to pop this 1 3/4 inches, or 4.5 centimetres from the top edge, matching up our centre mark that we've got there. So let's line up my ruler. Probably time to take out my pin now. So I can just about see it on my dark green leaf there. So I'm lining up my ruler. So 1 3/4 inches, or 4.5 centimetres from the top. And then lining up my zip facing with the centres matching. And I'm just going to add a little pin at the sides, just to hold that in place while we're sewing. Okay. Right, we do need to, the eagle-eyed among you will have spotted this, I do need to draw a line down the centre of our box, and a little triangle at each end, and this is going to show us where to cut through after sewing. So I'm going to draw my line down the centre and a little triangle at each end. My line has gone terribly wonky. Oh gosh, that's awful. Well, I think I must have moved somewhere in the middle. Your line will of course be much straighter than mine. Right, so all we're going to do now, we are just going to sew around the outside edge of this box. So where we've drawn our outside box, we're going to sew around. So I'm going to start around about there in the top edge, and I'm going to sew to the corner here. I'm going to start with my needle down, and when I get here, I'm going to shorten my stitch length if I need to, so that I can stop with my needle down in this corner, lift my presser foot and pivot, and sew to this corner, lift my presser foot and pivot, and then keep going all the way around the boxes. So you're keeping your needle down at these corners but lifting your presser foot. Now it's really hard to get into these corners accurately, isn't it? So if you find yourself approaching and you think, I'm definitely not going to be able to do that accurately, decrease your stitch length right down to maybe a half or a 1, you know, whatever you feel comfortable with, and get to that corner so that you can be really accurate. So I'm going to start at this top corner, and I'm going to sew all the way around, and then I'm going to overlap a few stitches just to secure those stitches. So I'm not going to back stitch, but I am going to overlap slightly. So I'm using my regular stitch length for this one, and I'm starting with my needle down. Right, I'm nearly there, but not quite. So I've gone down to 1. There we go, and it just took 1 stitch at number 1 stitch length. Just going around this corner, or this short edge, on number 1. So I can be really accurate again into that corner. Now I'm going to, no, hang on. I need to go back a little bit more. So I'm going to unpivot, or pivot back. Do 1 more tiny stitch, and then pivot, go back up to your regular stitch length, and then carry on. Okay, so back down to a tiny stitch length. and pivot. And along the short edge. Oh, one more. And then we can carry on to where we started. Right, great. So we'll take those pins out. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I cut anything, I'm just going to give this a little steam press, just on my very bendy board. It wasn't quite so bendy when I started, but I think the heat has got to it. Just going to give it a little steam press just to make sure those stitches are nice and set. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push against this facing. So I'm going to lift the facing up and push with the iron away from the lining main panel onto the facing. Okay, so it sticks up like that. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. And this is the secret to getting no creases on the right side of your zip pocket box. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? The zip pocket box. Right, and then we're going to do both side edges as well. Just the short ones. Okay. Right, now what we're going to do, so all 4 edges have been steamed and they're all kind of sticking up at a bit of an odd angle there. We're going to cut through that centre line. I am actually going to get my smaller scissors before we do that, because I don't want to be using my giant scissors for cutting through that box. Okay. So I'm just going to cut a little snip in through those layers. Use my giant scissors for cutting a snip. There we go. And then we're going to cut all the way along. And cut as far as my triangle with my big scissors because they're slightly stronger. So I'm cutting as far as the point of the triangle, but no further, not just yet. Okay, and then I'm going to cut into each point of the triangle as close as I can to the stitching without going through the stitches. Okay, you don't want to snip through the stitches. A little bit further on that one, that's it. And we're going to do that on both ends as well. Okay. They look pretty tight to me, so that looks good. Right, once you're happy that you've snipped through those triangles, well, maybe not happy, but once you've done that, then we're going to push this facing through to the back and give it a little press. Now, I press from the right side first and then from the wrong side, because you are going to get creases on a zip pocket box. That is inevitable, but if you press from the right side, then those creases will be inside, or they'll be on the wrong side. They'll be on the facing rather than on your lining main panel. Right, so I've folded that as best I can, and now I'm going to start in the middle of the bottom of the box, the middle of the bottom of the box, yep. And I've just finger rolled this bit here in the middle, and then I give it a little steam press. And then carry on a little bit further along the box. And the other side as well. Slow and steady wins the race on this one. This is not something you want to rush, although it is a little bit tedious doing it so meticulously. Right, so that bottom side is done. Nice. Okay. We'll do the top side as well. And you can just tug the facing back and out of the way from underneath if you want, if you find that it's still poking up or getting in the way. Right, so when you are happy that you've done the both long edges, then you can do the short edges as well. And from the right side, this looks really, really lovely and neat. There's no puckers, there's no creases. All looks very nice and precise. However, on the wrong side, you'll see there are some creases in these corners, but that's okay because those are going to be hidden inside and nobody is going to see them unless they unpick your bag to inspect it. And if somebody wants to unpick your bag to inspect it, then you don't need to be friends with them. Okay. Right then, for our zip pocket, so you've got your number 3 zip. Just double check that that unzips as it should. And your zip pocket top, which is the piece that is taller, and your zip pocket bottom, which is the piece that is shorter. So I'm using floral for my zip pocket bottom because that matches the pattern. So if you're watching this and following the pattern, it should tally up. Okay, let's pop your top to the side for the minute and get your zip pocket bottom. And we're going to add a line of double-sided tape to the upper edge of this zip pocket bottom, and we're going to add it onto the right side. So if you've got directional fabric, make sure that you pay attention to the uppers on these instructions. It will tell you where you need to place it, whether you need to place it on the upper edge or just any edge. If it says upper edge and you've got directional fabric, then do pay attention to that. All right, got a bit too much tape there. Okay, so we've got, I don't know if my fabric is directional. I think it's probably not. Don't know, but maybe it is. Don't know. So add your tape, take the backing off, and then we're going to add our zip on top. So we're just lining up the edge of the zip with the edge, the raw edge of the pocket, like so. And we've placed it with the zip pull to the right. So as you're looking at it, it's just there. Now we're going to sew this into place using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's a 6mm-ish, although a scant 1/4 inch would be smaller than that. Maybe a 5mm, maybe a 4mm. We're back stitch at the start of the end using our regular stitch length. Move that zip pull out of the way as you approach it. Okay, so I've sewn that into place on the top, and now we're going to fold it back and give it a little press. We're not going to top stitch it just yet. Just this line of stitching that we've already done. Fold it over and give it a little press. Close the zip up and give it a little press from this side as well. And that just makes sure that the fabric stays back and out of the way when we're sewing it into your lining or your zip pocket facing, so that it doesn't get caught. Right, so now we need our zip pocket top, and this is the longer piece. Pay attention to the instructions if you're using directional fabric. So I'm going to add a line of basting tape there as well. Take the backing off. And then our other panel, we're just going to line up the raw edges. I'm going to turn this around so I can see what I'm doing, and then I'll turn it back around to face you. We're just lining up the raw edges of the fabric on the sides. Of course, if you mark the centres like the pattern told you to, then you would have centres to follow. Unfortunately, I didn't do that because I didn't listen to myself, so I haven't. So I've just lined it up on the edges, and the raw edge of the fabric is aligned with the edge of the zip. Now we're going to repeat the sewing that we did on the other side. So we're going to stitch using our scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, and then we can fold this open and give that a press, the same as we did for the first half, just to help that zip sit nice and flat. So the right side of the zip should be on the wrong side of your fabric. So if you're looking at this thinking that looks wrong, it does look wrong, but it is correct, I promise. Oh dear, I've got a bit stuck there. There we go. And then the wrong side of your zip should be facing the right side of your fabric, like so. Because this nice side of your fabric is what's going to be inside your pocket. So don't panic, this is how it should be. Okay. Right, so this is how it should look. You've got your zip pocket top, which is the taller piece, and your zip pocket bottom, wrong side of the fabric, right side of the zip. And then on the other side you've got your right side of your fabric and wrong side of your zip. Now get your lining panel back, and what we're going to do is we're going to pop this with the zip showing through that window, that open window we've got there, and lining up the sides of the fabric. So we're going to need our double-sided tape back again, and we're just going to add a line of this to the top and the bottom of your zip box, or your zip opening that we've just made. You can add it to the edge, you know, the short edges as well, but you don't need to. The top and the bottom should be sufficient. Make sure that's nicely adhered, and then we'll take the backing paper off, and I'm just going to gently pop this into place, lining up the edges of your fabric, and then I'm going to flip it over and just readjust it so that the zip is evenly spaced in this opening here. Just adjust this side here. Okay, so once you're happy that that's nice and even in the window there, I'm just going to have a little peek and see where my metal stopper is. So my metal stopper is exactly there. Let me just make a note of that. I'm going to put a pin where my metal stopper is, so that when I'm sewing I don't accidentally hit into my metal stopper and break a needle. Now I'm going to sew starting from this bottom corner edge kind of bit, and then we're going to sew all the way around. Make sure your pocket is open flat on the back. I'm going to use my regular stitch length, although you can increase to a top stitching length, and as I approach the corners, so I'm going to start with my needle down. As I approach the corners, I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot around. So if you think you're not going to be able to get accurately into the corners and maintain an even seam allowance all the way round, then do decrease your stitch length down the same as we did when we sewed it to start with. So we're going to sew around about 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge of this box. Okay, I'm not going to back stitch, instead I'm going to overlap a few stitches when I come to the end. Right, now I've put my pin in so I know where the metal stopper is, so I'm taking that out and I'm making sure that as I stitch I'm avoiding that stopper. Right, that looks great, pleased with that. Okay, now all we need to do on the back is, oh hang on, before we do this, let's open the zip at least halfway, most of the way if you can. Flip your lining panel over and then we're matching all of the raw edges of just the zip pocket pieces and then pin through just those pieces. And we are going to leave a turning gap in the bottom of this pocket, and that's where we're going to turn the bag through later. So leave a nice large turning gap here. I just like to mark it with double pins so that I don't forget and carry on sewing. Oh dear, that pin is a little bit bent, isn't it? I think that one can go in the sharps bin. All right, so just make sure you're pinching the pocket pieces away from the lining. We only want to sew through the pocket pieces at the minute. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing here at the top and I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to use my regular stitch length. I'm going to sew down to here to this double pin and I'm going to back stitch again, but then I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my basting stitch and sew to the second set of double pins. I'm going to decrease my stitch length back down to my regular stitch length and back stitch, and then carry on up to the top and back stitch. So you'll have back stitching at the top and here, so at the top and at the start and end of the turning gap, and then across the turning gap you'll just have a few basting stitches which will steam press and we'll remove later, but it will make it a lot easier to close that turning gap later. Okay, so you can do this two ways. You can either fold your lining back and sew this way, or you can have it this way and fold your lining back. It doesn't really matter, whichever way you're most comfortable with works fine. Okay, so we're back stitch at the start, my regular stitch length. And then we're pivoting with my needle down and my foot up. Back stitch, increase your stitch length. So across that turning gap, and then decrease your stitch length back down to the regular stitch length and back stitch. And then we're going to carry on, pivot at the corner and continue to the end where we'll back stitch as well. Okay, now before we go any further, once I've taken these pins out, I am going to steam these basting stitches just so that we know we have definitely done that. Okay, right, so that is our zip pocket complete. Looks great inside, very nice and neat, no raw edges, and you've got that contrast piece of fabric in there as well. So this lining panel can be put to one, no, hang on, open the zip. Don't do what I just did. Do instead open the zip, okay, and leave it open. We'll put this to one side and we'll sew the slip pocket next. Okay, so the next thing you'll need is your zip pocket panel. Now I can't remember which way round mine's supposed to go, so I'll just have a look and see if it says, yes it does. Okay, so we're going to fold it right sides together, lengthwise, okay. That makes sense. So the long edge should be your top and bottom. And I'm going to add a pin in each corner. Now we're also going to add a turning gap into this just to turn the pocket through after sewing. It doesn't need to be quite so long. So I'm going to sew this exactly the same way as I did for the zip pocket in the end there. So I'm going to start at the top and back stitch, sew to here and back stitch, increase my stitch length to a long basting stitch and sew across the turning gap, decrease back down to my regular stitch length and back stitch, and then all the way back up to the top there. We had a couple of pins in here. I don't trust myself not to get this squiffy while I'm sewing it. Okay, so we're starting on our regular stitch length. Okay, great. So we'll take these pins out. And then we will steam this turning gap to start with. And on this one, what I'm going to do, actually, I am going to fold it back, fold the seam allowance back along that stitch line. Give it a little press. Just get rid of some of this steam a bit. And then fold it the other way. Fold it back along the stitch line. And give it a little press. Okay, lovely. Right, so we're going to need an unpicker and our scissors as well. Now, we're going to trim these corners, so I'm just trimming into the seam allowance on the top there. I'm just doing a nice wide triangle, taking as much out of the seam allowance as I can. And then on these bottom corners, we're going to snip straight across and then also take a little nibble extra out of that seam allowance. We'll do the same on this one as well. And a little nibble extra. And this just reduces the bulk in that seam allowance. So when you turn it through, it should be nice and neat. Right. So we'll unpick these basting stitches, and we'll be able to turn this pocket right side out then. So as you're unpicking these, this will just leave you a nice line of stitch holes that you can fold along to get a nice neat finish when you turn it through the right way. Okay, right, let's turn this through the turning gap. Get the pockets, the corners out first. And then turn the other two out. Now I did have a very nice crochet hook which I used to use for poking out corners, and I lost it, but then I found it again, and I've put it somewhere safe so I don't lose it again, and in the process of that I couldn't tell you where it is right now. So let's see what I've got that I can use as a pokey tool. Right, I'm going to use this flat head screwdriver and just be really gentle so I don't risk poking out those stitches at the top. So we want those to be nice and square, but we don't want to risk going through the stitches, do we? Okay, great. So once you're happy with that, have a look and see which side looks neater with this turning gap. Is it that side or that side? I think it's that side. So this is going to be my right side now. So I'm going to give that a little press. My seam allowances at the bottom are all lined up where we folded them under. And all of my edges are nicely turned out. No, they're not. I'm lying. This short edge just needs a little bit of a roll to turn those edges out. That's better. Let's do this side as well, just to be sure. Okay, and now I'm going to top stitch along the folded edge. So ignore the open edge for the minute. Ignore that open edge. I'm just going to top stitch along this top folded edge. I'm stitching using a slightly longer stitch than usual and 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. Okay, there we go. Right, so our pocket is ready to just attach it to the second lining panel. Just trim these extra threads before we get them caught anywhere. I'm going to nip and get a label to attach into my bag. So if you've got some labels that you want to sew in, then grab hold of those, and when I come back we'll attach this onto the second lining panel. Right, I've grabbed hold of my label. So we need our second lining main panel, and we can go ahead and mark the centres on this one, top and bottom, like we did for the other main panel. We'll just mark them in the seam allowances, and I'm doing mine front and back just so there's no worrying about losing the marks. That's fine. Is this one? This one's nearly on a green leaf, but not quite. Phew. Right, so we are going to place our slip pocket on top. I have to keep moving my label with it because I'm terrible for forgetting to attach my label, and I'm trying really hard not to forget because I had them printed years and years ago and keep forgetting to use them. Right, so we are going to put this onto the main panel 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters from the bottom. So let's mark that, or let's measure that with my ruler. 3 inches. That's where my center is. And then I'll find out the center of my slip pocket and line that up. along that mark. Okay, I'm just going to pin it at the corners to hold this in place so that it's not moving around. And then I can add my label. Just fold it in half and then slot it behind my pocket. Oh, not quite, there we go. Make sure it's peeking out. Now I have put on the pattern some measurements if you want to divide your pockets. So I'll show you how to do that as well. You'll need a, I'm going to use my chalk marker because I know that it will rub off again afterwards. And I'm going to follow the measurements on the pattern. So I'm going to mark 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters and 6.5 inches or 16.5 centimeters. All I'm doing is drawing a nice line with my chalk and 6.5. Just using my ruler to make sure that it's nice and even or parallel with the bottom edge of my pocket. Okay, so I'm going to add a couple more pins in just to make sure that this doesn't move around while we're working with it. And then I'll talk you through how I'm going to sew this in one go. You can sew your pocket on and then come back and do the divisions if you want, do the dividing lines, or you can do it in one go, and I'll talk you through how to do it in one go because that's what I like to do. So when I'll face it towards you. So I start here and I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to use my regular stitch length, and we're using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance or 3mm seam allowance. So I'm going to start here at the top and back stitch, sew down to this bottom corner, lead my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot, sew along to this line, leave my needle down and lift my presser foot and pivot, sew up this line, back stitch at the top, turn around and sew back down again, then pivot and sew along the bottom to the next line, pivot, sew up, back stitch at the top, stitch back down again, pivot, sew to the corner, pivot and up to the last top and back stitch. So we'll have back stitching at all of the points on the top because this is a stress area, or it's an area of weakness. So we'll have back stitching at the start here, and then we'll have one line of stitching along each side and bottom and 2 lines up each dividing line just to add a little bit of extra strength there. So I'm using my regular stitch length and an 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. I'm starting with my needle down. Okay, great. Nice and neat, and my label is in and we're all secure. So that's all good. Right, so that's both of our lining panels. Just rub this chalk out. Both of our lining panels complete, or our lining pocket panels complete. We've got our zip pocket and our slip pocket. So we just need to construct the top zip closure, and then our lining is ready to be sewn together. So pop these to one side and we'll get started on the zip. Right, so now you'll need your 2 zip tops that we made marks on earlier. There is a third pattern piece, or third piece of fabric, which is exactly the same size and length as these, which you need to put to one side for later. But these ones will be part of our zip. Okay. You'll also need your number 5 zip and a hand needle, which I still hate hand sewing, but we do need it, and some double-sided tape. Now I've steamed my zip, and I'm using continuous zip, so I steamed my zip before I cut it. I would recommend you steam your zip before you sew it in, because when you go to press your seam afterwards and press your zip tops away from the zip, if this hasn't been steamed, you've sewn it in, it can go a bit wibbly and a bit wobbly. Okay, so all we're going to do is, on the open end of your zip, we're just going to fold these teeth over at a right angle, which will mean that this bit of the zip tape folds up, and we want it to fold along the bottom of the zip teeth, so that is a nice finished end to the zip. You can see we've got the fold there. Okay, so have a little go, work out where it is you need to fold for that zip tape to meet the bottom of the teeth. For me, I think that's great. Once you're happy with it, then we're just going to add a couple of hand stitches in here just to hold it in place. Not doing anything special, just holding it in place. So don't worry if yours are messy, because mine are very messy. Okay, literally just to hold these open at an angle. Add an extra one. There we go. Okay, so that's one side. I'm going to do the same on the second side. Now this one, you want it to match, so just make sure that you are confident that it matches before you sew it into place. So that looks pretty good from that side, but let's double check how it looks. Yeah, that matches. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to add a line of stitches along the edge as we did before. There we go. Trim that extra bit of fluff away. Okay, so that's the top of our zip sorted. And if you're using continuous zip, the same as me, then we're going to add a few stitches just to the end to stop that zip pull coming off. So sew this really slowly and just go back and forth over the teeth at the end. A few times, just to make sure that as we're working with it, the zip pull can't come off, because you've got these stitches securing that on. Okay, great. So our zip is ready to use. So grab hold of one of your zip top pieces, your F. We need to unzip the zip. I'm not going to unzip it quite as far as those stitches, but most of the way. And then between these two marks that we made earlier, we're going to add a line of basting tape, and we're going to add it right along raw edge. If you've got directional fabric, then this needs to be on the bottom of your panel. We're just adding it there, and then we'll take the backing off, and then we're going to lay this zip right sides down. So let's see, we want that to be matching the right sides together, so right side down and matching raw edges. So with your zip like this, it will be the bottom piece. Let me tape this on, and then I'll turn it around so you can see it from your point of view as well. So all I'm doing is just matching up the raw edge of the fabric with the raw edge of the zipper. Okay, so from your point of view, you've got the tape along the bottom, and we're just adding the zip right sides down, matching the raw edge of the fabric to the bottom edge, or the raw edge of the zip. And I've placed the end, that folded end of my zip, I've just placed it in line with that first mark. Now we haven't got any tape from here on, so I'm going to add a pin to here to hold that bit in place, and then I'm going to fold this end of the zip tape up, and I've folded it up about an inch, that's 2.5 centimeters, and I'm adding a pin there to hold that in place. Okay, so this end of the zip is not going to be caught in our seam, just this part of the zip. Now we're going to sew this into place using a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. Okay, and I'm just using my regular stitch length here. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end of this. Now I've used my regular stitch length for that because I'm using cotton. If you're using vinyl, you might want to increase that to a basting stitch length, and that's completely fine. Okay, right, now we need one of our lining panels. So I'm going to use the one with the zip pocket on. Pop that zip top to one side, and we can unpin, take these pins out where there were markers. I'm going to leave that one in where it's pinned at an inch, just to make sure that it's nice and out of the way. Right, we've got our center mark here that we made earlier. Mine was over my green leaf, so I'm going to add my pin back in, and we should have a center mark on this panel as well, which if you followed the instructions you would have done that, but I didn't, so I'm gonna just mark it now and pretend that I did. Okay, and we're going to add a line of basting tape. You can either add it over this zip or along the lining main panel. It doesn't really matter. It's a little bit easier along the lining main panel maybe, because it's nice and flat, hasn't got any zip teeth involved yet. And then I can take the backing paper off of there. And then we're just going to place this right sides down, so fabric right sides down. So you've got the wrong side of the zip and the right side of the fabric. We're just going to place this right sides down, matching up centres. So I'll just stick that into place, or press that down on the basting tape temporarily, and then I'll show you what we've got. So we've got our lining right side facing the zip top right side, and if you pull the zip top back you can see the right side of the zip. Okay, so the right side of the zip is facing the right side of the zip top, and the wrong side of the zip is facing the right side of the lining. Now once you're happy that your centres are nicely matched up, then we're going to sew this using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just going to take that pin out so we know where it is. I'm using my regular stitch length for this one, and I'm going to backstitch at the start and the end. You can also backstitch as you go over the ends of the zip if you want, for a bit of extra security. Right, just went a bit wibbly there, so you can see it just there if you want to make yourself feel better about your stitching that's not wibbly. I'm just going to go over that little bit. That's better. Okay, and I forgot to backstitch over the end of the zip, so I'm going to backstitch there a bit as well, just to be sure. Okay. Right, lovely. So we can take this pin out, and then we can open this out and give that a nice press. Now your seam allowances should be facing or underneath the zip top at this point. So we'll give that a little press to make sure that they stay where we want them to stay before we top stitch. And this will mean that when your bag is open or unzipped, the zip teeth will fall down inside the bag and they won't stick up outside of the bag. Okay, so they'll fall down naturally inside. Now all we're going to do is top stitch on the zip top side through all of those layers, all of those seam allowances, and we're going to stitch. Well, you can use your top stitching stitch length if you want, and we're going to stitch at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from that seam on the zip top side. And I like to backstitch at the start and the end, just so I know it's not going to come unravelled while I'm sewing, but you don't need to. Okay, lovely. Right, so that is one half done. We just need to do the second half. Okay, so we'll get our second half of our zip top, add a line of basting tape between these two marks, same as we did for the first half. So the process for this is exactly the same. We just need to try and ignore the fabric that's hanging on to the half of the zip now. Okay, so take that backing paper off. Now we are going to use this second half of the zip. So where you've got your first half right sides up, fold this over so that it's right side down, and just going to match up with the marks. Now before you sew this, you can just align it with this first piece and make sure that you're going to have no problems, that it matches up pretty well. Yeah, great. Okay, now I'm going to lift the end of the zip, same as we did before, at 1 inch. You can see where that's happened here, where we've sewn it into the seam, so it keeps it free of the seam. That's all we're doing. And we'll baste this in at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the raw edge. Back stitch. so as I said, we've just got to ignore this first piece there. I'll take those 2 pins out there, and we need our second lining main panel, and we're going to match up the centres. Oh dear, I haven't got my centre here, have I? Not yet. We will do. Let's mark my centre. If you can hear the squeaking of my stool, I'm really sorry. I don't know why it's so squeaky today. Every time I move, it's squeaking. Right. Oh, except for that one time when I tried to demonstrate that it was squeaking and it didn't squeak. Okay. So we'll add our line of basting tape along the top edge of the lining, same as we did for the first half. Take this backing paper off. And then we're going to add this second zip panel. Now we need to flip this over so that the centres can match firstly, but also so that the edge with the zip attached is matching the top edge of the lining main panel. Okay, so it doesn't really matter how your other panel is right now. That's okay, as long as at this point, because we can always untangle it afterwards, but at this point, as long as your fabric are facing right sides together with the zip sandwiched between them and the teeth, the right side of the teeth facing the zip top. Okay, and if you want to, if you don't trust that this is in the right place, you can always just line it up as though you've sewn this into place and just double check that they do match like that. Don't worry too much though if this is tangled or twisted, because you can untangle it before we sew these panels together. So at this point we just want to make sure that the teeth, or the right side of the teeth, is facing the right side of the fabric, and we're going to try and ignore that piece. So then we're going to sew this into place using our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, ignoring that first half, and using your regular stitch length. Okay, there we go. So now we can fold this back. Let's take that extra pin out. We can fold this back and top stitch it. If you want to double check that it zips up and matches, so you can see here it's all twisted and you can think, oh no, I've done it wrong. Don't panic, just untwist it. You can zip it up before you top stitch. You can zip it up and just double check that it all matches and it's all good before you do your top stitching. Okay, so ignore that first half and we'll press our seams like we did before. Just keeping all those seam allowances in the right place and making sure we've got a nice neat edge to this zip top. Because every time you look in your bag, this is what you're going to see. Right, so now we'll just top stitch along there, the same as we did before, with our 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance away from the edge on the zip top. Okay, great. Okay, now we need to be worried about whether the zip is twisted or not. So go ahead and untwist it if it is twisted. and then we're going to add a zip end to the end of this zip. Okay, so it depends how much you want to be able to, or how wide you want to be able to open your bag. You do need to leave at least ½ inch or 1.2 centimeters extra after the end of the panel. I like to open my bags quite wide, so I'm going to leave a good hefty tail on there, I think. So I'm just going to cut off the excess. And then we need a zip end. I'm using the ones from Emmeline that come with the nice screws. And a screwdriver. And I always, in my patterns, I try to have the screwdriver in the photo, so when I'm following it myself I can remember which screwdriver I used. It's a little bit easier for me. So if you've seen any of my patterns with the screwdriver in, that's why. It's purely selfish reasons. Oh dear. Right, okay, so we need the screw. In fact, hang on, let's leave the screw where it is for the minute. Now, to fit these into this zip end, what I like to do is I like to fold the zip tape back under the teeth like this on one side, and then on the other side fold that zip tape in half and then over behind the teeth. Got a little bit of an extra fray there. Okay, so I'm going to add some glue into my zip end. I'm going to make sure that's right down inside, just as a bit of extra security to this zip end. Okay, now you've got a little while to work with that, so don't panic too much. You don't have to insert your zip end too quickly. So fold one half of the zip tape underneath, fold the other half or in half, and fold that underneath the zip teeth, so it's a nice neat little parcel. And then pop that inside your zip end, give it a nice wriggle so that it's nice and secure, and then we'll retrieve one of these screws and add it. Be too easy, wouldn't it, if it just attached magically. I'm just gonna add this in the back, and that's a self-piercing screw, so as long as you've got it straight, it should go through all of those layers pretty easily and secure that into place. But don't panic if it doesn't go in quite all the way, because you've got that extra glue in there as well. Right, so that's our zip top, nice and finished, and a nice shiny zip end as well, just to add a bit of bling. What we're going to do now is we're going to finish off this lining and get the sides and the bottom all sewn up and finished and put to one side before we start on the exterior. Right, so what we're going to do, I'm just going to zip up my zip first, because I want to make sure that my lining is not twisted and that my zip matches itself. So if when you've done your zip up, one side doesn't quite match on the edges, then favour matching up the one that does and then trim the other one down to match. Okay. Also, when we're pinning this or when we're clipping this, you want to favour matching these seams where the zip top matches the lining. Okay, there's nothing worse than looking inside your bag and having a little bit misaligned, so favour matching these over matching these bottom edges, because you can always trim those to match. So what I'm going to do is add a pin just where those two layers match there. I'm going to tuck my zip tail in out of the way. And I'm going to match these 2 layers. Oh, hang on. I did say about making sure that these line up, didn't I? And then I didn't. So mine doesn't quite line up here. It's around about there. So I am going to match it from a green and pink point of view. But I'm going to make sure that it's sitting straight according to the zip as well. I'm not sure I went through all the layers there. Let's try again. Yeah, great. Okay, so I know that that's sitting nice and straight, and this is not sitting quite so straight, but I can just ease that. And if I need to trim a bit off the side here, then that is absolutely fine. Right, now I'm going to open my zip so that it's at least halfway and our zip pocket is still open. And then we'll just clip these layers all together. Now I'm clipping down the sides and the bottom. We are going to leave another turning gap in the bottom, I believe. Let me just double check. Hang on a second. Let me just double check before we go any further. Yes, we are. Okay, so we're going to have 2 turning gaps in this bag. So the turning gap in the bottom of the lining is the one that we're going to turn the bag through, because that's going to be a nice big turning gap. So I'm doing double clips there. And then we are going to close this gap using the turning gap in the pocket that we've left as well. Okay. Now I'm coming back to this side where it's not quite matching up. So let me see how I can match this up. And I am going to trim a bit down to help it sit nice and flat. So don't be afraid to do that yourself if it doesn't quite match up. Much better to trim a bit down and have a nice neat bag than have a slightly skewed bag because you didn't want to trim any off. And it could just be wonky cutting, could be wonky sewing, could be I didn't line up my zip quite well enough, could be anything, but it doesn't matter. Just trim it off so that it matches nice and neat. Okay. Also, we're all friends here. Nobody's going to know, are they? Because nobody's going to tell. So there we go. Right, so just add a couple of pins there. Now we're going to start at the top and back stitch, and then we're going to sew to here using our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then from here we're going to taper up to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's a 1.2 seam allowance. So we're starting at 1 centimetre and we're tapering up to 1.2 centimetre until we get to the end. And then we're going to taper back down to our 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimetre at the end. You can draw these seam allowances on if you want. So we're going to do 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre either end, and then this bit in the middle we're just going to go up to 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetres. We're going to sew the bottom seam using our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to baste between these 2 double clips, same as we did for our zip pocket. And then we're going to sew the side seam the same, so start at 3/8 of an inch and then taper to a 1/2 inch. We're going to leave these corner cutouts open, so we're using our regular stitch length, and we are going to we're going to back stitch at the top and the end. Now I realised I told you a lie. I said we were going to taper back at the end, but we're not. We sew 1/2 inch all the way down because we're sewing the bottom seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we need those to match really, don't we? Okay, so I'm back stitching at the start. And then I'm going to stop there and back stitch. Increase to my basting stitch length. Stop there and decrease back down again, back stitch, sew to the end and back stitch, and then up the second side. So I'm going to start with my bigger 1/2 inch seam allowance and then I'm going to taper back down to a 3/8 once I get to that zip top there. Now as I approach this, I'm just going to pull my hand in, pop my hand in and pull that zip out of the way. Lovely. Okay. Right. Okay. So, now we need to sew our box corners, but I think to get a really, really, really nice, neat finish, let's just press our seam allowances open. Okay, this is a bit of an extra step that's not in the pattern, but this is a handy tip for any bag that you make. If it's got flat sides or flat seams, you wouldn't want to do this on a curved bag. But if you press open seam allowances, well, we want to press these basting stitches anyway, don't we? So we'll press those, but we're going to press open the end of each end of the bottom seam. And you only need to do the ends of the bottom seam because we'll be closing that through the zip pocket later, which sounds a bit complicated, but just trust me at this point. So we're opening the seam allowance at the bottom just on the ends, and then on the sides let's press those open as much as we can, as far as we can, and then inside your bag they'll sit really nice and neat, hopefully. Okay, I'm just pressing those open, and I'm definitely going to press open at the top here because that is going to give me a nice neat finish on the exterior when I sew my exterior in. I'm just finger pressing that back. Give that a little bit of steam just to help it set. How does that look? That looks great on that side, and we'll do this second side. This should help eliminate some of that bunching that you sometimes see on the inside of linings, where you know they fit, and if you push them right into the corners then they fit perfectly, but sometimes they bunch up, and that can be where your seam allowances are not sitting open, so they're being pushed away by the exterior seam allowances inside the bag. They're sort of pushing against each other, so they don't sit nice and flat against each other. But if you can open them up, then they're more likely to sit nice and neat. Right, so with those all pressed nice and open, we are now gonna flatten these box corners. So you just bring the side seam to meet the bottom seam and match up those seam lines, and make sure that that is nice and neat and straight. And then I believe we're going to sew across these using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Yep, that's right. and then that will be our lining finished, and we can get on with the exterior of the bag then, which I think is probably the most fun bit of this bag. Okay, so regular stitch length, regular seam allowance, back stitching at the start and the end. And the other side. Okay, so before we put this to one side, just have a little peek in, check that that looks nice and neat. It looks great from here, and I'm sure yours looks great as well, but that is our lining complete for the minute, and we can put it to one side and get started on the exterior. Right, let's get started on the exterior. So you're going to need your exterior cargo pocket piece. You're going to need 2 female halves of your magnetic snap, so you should have 4 halves altogether, 2 pairs, so we just need the 2 matching female ones. Okay, we put the male ones to one side for later. 2 washers and 2 pieces of just scraps of foam stabilizer. Right, let's mark the centers of the cargo pocket. Do that. I'm going to do it on the right side and the wrong side. No, I won't. No, I won't. I'll just do it on the wrong side for now. Now we are going to place these magnetic snaps in through the right side of the exterior. All you need is a ruler, and if anybody knows where my ruler has gone, answer on a postcard. Oh, hang on, I found it. It's underneath a pile of pieces. Okay, there we go. Right, so it tells you the measurements in the pattern of where to place them. I'm going to place them 2 inches from the top edge and 4.5 inches from the centre. So just make sure that these are lined up sort of parallel to the top of the pocket, and that is going to be to the centre of the washers. Okay, so the measurements in the pattern are to the centres of the washers. So pop your washer down on that mark you've just made and draw through these slits. We're going to cut through here for the prongs to go through. Need a little bit of fray check as well, and some tape just to secure those afterwards. Right, so we're just going to snip through these tiny little prong slits. Try not to make your snips too big. Okay, and then we're going to add a dab of fray check. I'm going to add this from the front, I think. And then I can just make sure it's not spreading too far on my exterior fabric. Okay, let's give that a second to dry. And then all we need to do is pop the prongs through from the right side, through those slits you've just made. Add a piece of foam stabilizer, and that just gives it a bit of extra security, and a washer. And then we'll bend these prongs down. I'm going to see if I can do it with my screwdriver. Now, I always bend my prongs in towards each other, since I saw somebody's magnetic snap had come, had slipped out where it had worn away, and the prongs just kind of slipped out of the fabric. So now I always bend them in on each other, although I always used to say it doesn't matter, either way is fine, but now I always do them in, just so that where they're pulling against is they're pulling against themselves, So you're pulling against the snap. So in theory, it should make it a little bit more secure and less prone to fraying. Right, I'll bend these prongs down as well. And then all I'm going to do is just add a bit of this duct tape to the back to make sure that these don't rub through to my lining. They just stay a little bit extra secure. Add that over the top. Doesn't really matter which way you put that on. I've only put it that way because I've cut it a bit short for it to go the other way. You can go the other way if you prefer though. Just stick that down nicely. Right, so now we want our lining for our cargo pocket. So you've got your exterior there and we want our lining as well. So we're going to place these right sides together. Just make a bit more space. Right sides together, cargo pocket, lining and exterior. Matching up all of the raw edges. Okay, let me clip that. Now we're going to sew the top and the bottom only. We're not going to sew the sides. We're going to leave those unsewn or open. Firstly, because there's no need to sew the sides because that'll be in the side seam of the finished bag. But then we don't have to leave a turning gap either. We can just turn it through the open sides. Right, so just going to use our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance. Back stitch at the start and the end of these. And we're sewing the top and the bottom. Okay. Let's turn that right sides out. So just reach through one of the short ends that's open. Turn that right sides through. If you've got particularly thick fabric, you might want to grade those seam allowances, trim some of the fabric away. That's okay. Right, now smooth along these seams that you've just sewn to make sure these are turned out fully. Doesn't really matter so much about the bottom edge as long as the lining is tucked in, but the top edge you want it to fit onto the snaps on the flap, so you do want to make sure that this is fairly accurate if you can. Take that protective plastic on because I think I might melt it. Right, so all we're going to do now is give this a nice press along the top and the bottom seams to turn it out. I might have to do a bit more finger rolling here to make sure that's nice and turned out. Okay, so get my little pressing board and I'm just going to give it a little bit of steam press along the top here to make that nice and neat. I'm going to go all the way along the top edge. And this side. And then I'm going to do the same on the bottom edge. Just smooth it along. Make sure that all that lining is tucked in underneath, so it's not peeking out on the front of your bag. I don't think it would be actually a terrible thing if it was peeking out. Might be a nice little feature actually, but Right, there we go. Okay, very nice, very neat. So now we're going to top stitch along this top edge of the cargo pocket. We're only top stitching along the top edge. We're not top stitching along the bottom edge, okay? So just the top edge for now. And we're going to sew 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the top. And I've lengthened my stitch length slightly. There we go. Right. So here's our cargo pocket ready to start constructing. I'm going to use my white chalk pen so that you can see it on camera. But you're going to want to use something that you can either wash away or iron away or brush away like chalk, something not permanent. And what we're going to do is mark the center first. So fold your panel in half. Oh, those have snapped together, which is actually really helpful because it means we can be sure that that is exactly in the center. So I'm just going to add a pin in there. In fact, I'll add one in the bottom as well, just for a bit of extra security that that is definitely the center. And then I'm going to draw a line with my chalk pen along those 2 pins, which will be in the center then. Okay, great. Now you've got the option, you can either draw all of the lines that are in the pattern, or you can just draw the ones that are furthest away. So we want to, so the one that's 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters away from the center, that's going to be the line that is folded in, so the inside fold. And then the one that's further away is going to be the outside fold. So if you want to be sure that it's very exact, you can do both. If not, you can just do the one. It's up to you. I'm going to do both, because this is the video tutorial. So I'm drawing a line at 3/4 of an inch and also 1.5 inches. And I'll do that both sides. And 1.5 inch. So that's 2 centimeters and 3.8 if you are working in metric. Okay. So what we want to do is fold this panel right sides together along these 3/4 of an inch lines, so that this furthest away line meets the center line. What you can do as well is just fold along the center line, this furthest away line, and press that first. Let's do that, and then it'll be a little bit clearer on the video, I think, of where we're going with this. I think sometimes you need to see where we're going to be able to carry out the steps, I think, or sometimes I do. Okay, so I've folded along that line that is furthest away, that 1.5 inch line, and I'm going to fold that now along the middle line that we've got so that they meet. Just give that a little press and then I'll show you what we've got. Now if you're using faux leather or thicker fabric, you will find that this doesn't fold so well. That's okay, don't panic. Right, so we've got our center line here where my pins are, and I've folded this furthest away line to meet that centre line, which means that this middle line here, this line in between the two, this 3/4 line, has got the inside fold and this one's got the outside fold. So if you're happy that you've done that correctly, you can pin that or clip that. I think I'm going to clip it just to keep it in place for the minute while we're doing the second side. And then I'm going to fold along this 1.5 line on the other side. Make sure that your pocket is completely parallel, top and bottom. And we'll give that a little press. And then we can fold that one into the centre as well, same as we did. So it should meet that first fold, and this top and bottom should be just one straight line there. Take these clips out for a minute while I just press this side. We are going to stitch these into place, so don't panic too much, but a nice steam press just makes it easier to work with these creases. Okay, so what we've got now at the moment, move that off my board, is these 1.5 lines are folded up and out, and these 3/4 lines are folded down inside the creases there. Okay, if you've got time to spare, you might want to just leave these clipped, go off, do something else, come back to them, because you know that's going to be a really nice, neat, crisp fold then. If not, what you can do is you can just crack on with the sewing. What we're going to do is sew along these 1.5 inch lines. So I'm going to start with this one because I can start at the top. Well, it doesn't matter actually if you start at the top or the bottom, really doesn't matter. But you will want to sew on the outside of the pocket. Okay, so I think I'm going to start from the top on this one. And we're sewing using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 3mm seam allowance. Just back stitching at the start so that my thread doesn't come unravelled. Okay, and the only reason I've said to sew on the on this bit is because that's the bit that you're going to see when your bag is constructed. So for this one, for me to sew on the outside, I'm going to need to start at the bottom and sew up to the top. Okay, I'll just trim these loose little threads here. Let's see if I can use this pin to get my loose thread out. There we go. That'll be under your flap anyway, so don't panic too much. Right, okay, so that is nice, and those pleats are going to remain because you've top stitched those. Now we need our exterior panel, our exterior main panel. So let's have a look at what we've got, the pieces of fabric we've got left that look like main panels. So we'll pop the cargo pocket to one side for the minute. Now you should have two pieces that are out of exterior fabric. One is taller and has got this straight bit at the top, and one is shorter. And I've pinned my last piece F to this one, just so I don't lose it and misplace it. Okay, so this one that's taller behind, that's the back panel, so you can put that to one side for the minute. The one we want is this shorter one. hang on to that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to place our cargo pocket on top of this panel. So we'll mark the centres to make sure that we're keeping everything lined up nice and straight. And I'm going to mark that on the wrong side and on the right side for this one. Right, okay, so we're going to place this, and you will notice that your cargo pocket is quite a bit wider than your main panel. Don't worry, that's to incorporate these creases. So we're going to put this 2 3/4 inches or 7 centimetres up from the bottom of this exterior main panel. So let's line that up with my centre mark. And take that pin out because we can see where we're going now with this one. And I'm going to line up this cargo pocket so that the centre line, this one that we've got here, is lined up perfectly with the centre of this main panel. And I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in there to hold it in place. And I'll just change this one. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew along this central line first and secure the pocket to the main panel before we fold it down and secure the rest of the pocket into place. So I'm going to start sewing from the bottom. I'm going to back stitch here at the bottom, and I'm going to sew all the way up to the top, back stitch a little bit, maybe a couple of 3 times maybe, turn around and sew all the way back down again. And I'm going to use my regular stitch length, or you can use your top stitching length, it doesn't matter either way, but we're going to sew directly on that centre line that we've got. Just make sure that all your layers are nice and flat and smoothed out. Right, so this pocket is secured onto the main panel. All we need to do now is fold these into the centre, and in theory these edges should line up perfectly, and they do on this side, so that's great. Let me add a little clip in here just to hold these pleats together at the top so that they're not causing a nuisance. So on the bottom or on the sides, if that matches up perfectly, great, clip it into place. We can baste it as it is. However, on this side, mine is not quite matching up along this bottom edge of the pocket. So I'm just going to smooth it out slightly so that it does match. Because we want that to be caught in the side seam so it's nice and secure. Okay, now what we're going to do is just, if you have had to adjust it slightly, just smooth out these creases or these pleats so they match as best they can in the middle. That matches pretty well actually, considering I've had to adjust it, so that's fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to baste along the sides, or you can just use your regular stitch length, but we're going to top stitch along the bottom here, and we're going to use a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance along the bottom, and you can use a 1/4 of an inch along the sides, unless you get confused, in which case use a 1/8 of an inch along the sides, just so you know that you're keeping to the same seam allowance. As we go over these pleats at the bottom here, what I'm going to do is from around about there, that's where my pleat starts underneath, to around about there where my pleat ends underneath, I'm going to go over that section and then I'm going to back stitch and then go forwards again. So that should have 3 lines of stitching over there just to secure it, because I know I'm really a bit rough on my bags. And then I'm going to sew to the end. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start up here and I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to sew to here, stop with my needle down and pivot, and then sew along the bottom here, stop my needle down, pivot, and sew up to the end, and just secure that in place. So I'm using my regular stitch length for this. Okay, so I've got to the other side of the pleat and now I'm going to go backwards over my stitching. If you're not confident reversing, you can always lift your presser foot, pivot and sew back over it forwards. Great. Okay, so you can just trim all of these extra little threads, and that's our cargo pocket done, ready for the flap, and then we can finish construction of this front panel. And take these out now as well, so we're finished with those. Got all my extra little threads while I'm seeing them. There we go, so that's our cargo pockets. I think that looks great actually, and you could probably add these cargo pockets onto the back panel as well. You could do 2 front panels on your bag instead of having 2 different panels, or you can add them inside to your lining, or you can, you can add them onto any bag really. Right, so that's our cargo pockets done. Let's get started on our flap. Okay, so I've got my exterior flap with my foam attached, and I've got my lining flap as well with my interfacing attached. The exterior's got the interfacing then foam, and this one's just got interfacing. I've got my remaining 2 magnetic snap pieces and 2 washers and 2 more pieces of foam, plus my fray check, tape, pinking shears, and I'll need my paper scissors as well. Right, what we are going to do then is we're going to add our remaining magnetic snap pieces to the lining of the flap, and I'm marking the centers of this just before we get started, partly to help us line up the magnetic snap, but also we're going to need this when we come to add our flap onto our main panel. Just make sure it's all nicely lined up. Right, okay. So, let's see. We are placing these 3 inches from the centre, 7.5 centimetres from the centre, and 1.5 inch or 3.8 centimetres from the bottom rounded edge. Okay. Let me just double check on here that that is accurate. 3 inches to the centre. Yep, great. Okay. Should be. But you know, I'm not convinced on my accurate stitching sometimes. Right, so 1.5, oh that's 1 1/4, 1.5 inches from the bottom edge, and 3 inches from the center, and that will be to our center of our magnetic snap. So make your mark and then grab hold of your washer and draw the prong slits there. Okay, right, we'll snip through. Again, making really tiny snips. Should really be using a much smaller pair of scissors than that. And then I'm going to add my fray check on the front, except I can't see where my slits are. I think they're there. And where are they? There they are. This fabric is great if you want to hide a wrongly cut prong hole, apparently, because it's hiding my not wrongly cut prong holes. Right, okay, so let's add our snaps. I'm using the M-line snaps here, which is why they come in this protective bag, just to stop them from being scratched in transit, I think. Right, so we'll push them through from the right side, through those prong slits. Maybe could have done with making them slightly bigger slits. Let's try with my smaller scissors and see if that's better. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and this one, see if this one will go through. Oh dear, I'm not doing very well at this. I'm losing my magnetic snap. There we go. There's one side in. And the other side. And then we'll add this foam stabilizer onto the back. Already cut my prong slits for these, so I'm feeling very well organized. And then add the washer, and again I'm going to bend them inwards onto each other. I should try and use my screwdriver to get them down, and then add washer there. There we go. I'll bend the other prong down on top. Right, nice and secure. So we'll add a scrap of tape to the back to make sure they're not going anywhere. Make sure they don't rub through. Although you have got the stabilizer on the outside of the flap, so they shouldn't rub through. It's just nice to know that those metal backs are protected, not going anywhere. Right. Okay, so next thing we are going to do is we're going to sew the exterior and the lining flap together, right sides together, matching up all of these nice curved edges. Now we're only going to sew around the exterior curvy bits. We are not going to need to sew along the top because that is going to be inserted into our seam. So you can go ahead and leave that bit open. Okay, right, so I'm going to sew around using my regular stitch length and my regular seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Except I haven't started with the correct seam allowance there, so I'll start again. That's better. Now we can trim these curves. I'm just double checking on the front that I haven't misstitched anywhere or gone through any bits of basting that shouldn't have gone through. No, great. So just trim these curves, and this will help the curves to sit really nice and neat. If you haven't got pinking shears, then you can just clip into the seam allowance just to help it spread out. Okay. And then let's turn that through to the right side. After we've finished this flap, that will give us a real feeling of how our bag is going to look when we've finished it. So I'm quite looking forward to that. Okay, so we are going to give that a nice press, but I can see a little peek of my lining out from underneath on the bottom of my flap there. I think you can see it if I turn it around that way. Although that looks quite nice, doesn't it? It looks like piping. But what I'm going to do, because I want this to all line up, just going to add a little pin in the top there to keep that lining layer where it should be. And make sure that it's not peeking out. Yeah, that's better. So I'm going to give this a little press just to make sure it's nice and neat, and then we can top stitch this. Now remember, you have got your snaps in there. So if you are using something like faux leather, you'll probably want to use a pressing cloth or something, just to make sure that they don't get pressed through to the other side. Let's smooth that back. Give it a press from this side as well. Okay. And then we can top stitch this flap. So we're going to stitch an eighth of an inch, sorry, away from the edge, or 3mm away from the edge. Just going to finger roll around the edge here. Make sure that my lining is definitely not peeking out. Although I do like the idea of this flap with a bit of piping. I think that sounds like a really nice idea. And then we will top stitch using our regular stitch length, or your top stitching length if you want to increase it slightly. I'm going to sew an eighth of an inch or 3mm away from the edge around the curve. And then we're also going to baste the top layers together. You don't have to do that, but it just might be a little bit easier to handle when you're inserting it into the seam. Your choice though. Okay. Okay, so that's nicely top stitched. Just make sure all these layers are nice and smooth, and I'm just going to baste along the top to keep the layers together. There we go. Okay, right, that looks great. Now we want to find the center of the flap before we go much further. So let's just mark the center of the flap. Hang on, I've measured and that's not even the center. I've measured and then put my pin in the wrong place. There we go. Okay, so that's the center. Right, we'll add this to the exterior panel that's going on the front now. So get hold of your front panel that's got your cargo pocket attached, and snap that up. That snaps together brilliant. Okay, now once it's snapped together, if it's slightly hanging over the edge at the top here, then that's fine. Just make sure that it's all nice and smooth, baste it on, and then we can trim any excess off. Just making sure that my centers are matched here. Okay, we'll smooth this out. We're just going to baste this into place along the top. All we're doing is just going along the whole top of that, just basting the flap into place. Right, we need our final zip top exterior top piece, which is this one. This is the same as the zip top pieces, but hasn't got the marks on it. And we need to find the center of that one as well, just to make sure this is all nicely lined up. Now I'm going to have a look and see if there's a way that this looks more matched. Don't think it does, but that looks more unmatched. That looks more deliberately unmatched, so I'll go with that way. And we're going to place this right sides together along this top raw edge where you've got the flap and the front panel, or the exterior main panel. And I'm just clipping this into place. We're going to sew along the entire top now, so go back down to your regular stitch length. I'm going to use our regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance, back stitch at the start and the end. I'm also going to back stitch when I get to where the flap starts and ends as well. There we go. So that is our front panel of our bag, and that gives you a real good idea of how your bag is going to look. And this might not be to your taste, but oh my goodness, I love this. This is great for me, my taste. And also it'll be a nice, well, I was going to say it'd be a nice spring bag, but it's green, so it'd be great for summer and autumn and winter as well. So I'm quite pleased with that. Right, so let's press these seam allowances. So you've currently got the seam allowances sticking up, so just fold the front extension back and give that a little press, so the seam allowances are all facing towards the top. I think this would look really good with a contrast flap and cargo pockets as well. I think the possibilities on this one are quite extensive. Right, so we are going to top stitch on the front extension 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the seam, using our top stitching stitch length. Right, and we've gone through all of our layers there. So that is our front panel done and ready to sew into our exterior. Right, let's move on to the exterior then. So you should have your back panel and your front panel. And all we need to do now is just add our stabilizer to these. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same for both. Just right, just going to smooth these out over our foam, same as we did for our flap. So I'm going to pin in this bottom corner. And then smooth out. Because we've got the cargo pocket on this one, I'm just going to smooth out along the bottom edge on this one, so I don't risk distorting the cargo pocket. I'm adding more pins in than is probably necessary, but I just like to be sure that nothing's going to move around. And in the top edge there, make sure it's all just nice and smooth. No wrinkles, no puckers. Oh, if it was so easy to de-wrinkle one's face. Right, so all we're going to do is just baste around the outside of this using our longest stitch length. Just around all 4 sides. And I'm going to use a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. Okay, so that's one panel done. I'm going to do exactly the same on the back panel, except it should be easier because we haven't got all this bulk of pockets and things. If you want to add a bit of extra stitching in along the top of the bottom there, you can, that's up to you. But we'll just trim this away for the minute. So remember, the same as we did for the flap, just turn it over and just snip along the foam, just pull the foam back, snip along, and take the bulk out of this foam. Okay, now I'm going to show you a little tip for those of you who haven't got particularly strong sewing machines like me. And just I'm going to show you how to take away extra bulk. So if your seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, then draw a line 1/2 an inch from the edge of your fabric. So that's your seam allowance plus 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so metric, if my seam allowance is 1 centimetre, draw a line 1.2 centimetres away. Okay, and I'll do the same on this side. Okay. And then all we're going to do is just snip this foam away. You will have to cut through a couple of stitches there where we basted it in. Just cut this foam away from this corner just to reduce the bulk that's actually going to be in this bottom corner seam. Just cut those stitches, snip through those stitches, just pull this extra bit of foam out. And the same on this side. Okay, and then also in this top corner as well, just going to take away a bit extra. So you can probably get away with, oh, I don't know, because that's going to be a little bit bulky, isn't it? So maybe a 3/4 of an inch, except that's more than 3/4. Hang on, I've got my ruler around the wrong way. No wonder it's so confusing. So let's line it up on the inch line. That would probably be better, wouldn't it? So draw a little square in the top corner that's an inch line. This is not in the pattern, this is just an extra bonus tip for you that you can use with all bags that are like this, just if you haven't got a very strong machine. So all we're going to do is just snip this extra inch away of this foam, and you'll find that when you come to do your final construction, it's a lot easier. So these top corners, this is going to remove the bulk from the side seams where you're joining your bag together and then top stitching, and then this extra bit in the bottom will be when you do your boxed corners, and it shouldn't be noticeable at all on your final bag. So these top corners, you'll have the seam in the side, and then when you're doing your top stitch, you'll have the double seam there inside, so it just reduces the bulk in that corner there. Right, I hadn't planned on doing that, so hopefully you didn't feel the need to fast forward, but there we go, that was an extra little tip. Right, so the back panel, all we need to do on this one is just baste this to the foam, so we'll spread it out. And I'll use my pins, same as I have before. So pin in the corner, smooth out in the opposite direction. And then pin in this corner, and smooth out in the opposite direction. And then pin at the sides, top, side and bottom, and I might just do this corner as well and this corner as well, just to be sure that it's not going to shift around. Now if you want to plan ahead for trimming foam, then why don't you just mark on your exterior fabric where to stop sewing to do that extra trim. So mark half an inch away from the edge there. Don't know why I've got half an hour on the brain. And then an inch either side of this. Might put a little clip in there just to remind myself, because that's easy to not see on this fabric. I'll do an inch here. Add a little clip just to remind myself. I'll do half an inch here, and so I can use these markings to tell myself when to stop and when to start basting. Okay. So I can start basting at that 1/2 inch mark and then carry on to the other 1/2 inch mark. And then move round to the next 1/2 inch mark and start again. And then stop at that mark and move round to the next mark. There we go. So when I trim this now, I shouldn't need to rip any stitches out. I can just trim it around those extra bits. I don't really need to trim on my machine because I've got a very strong machine. But I just thought it'd be helpful for those of you who haven't and do struggle a little bit with sewing through thick layers, how you can reduce that down. Sometimes the advice is to stop using foam and things, and you don't always want to stop using foam, do you? Because sometimes you will still want the structure of the bag. You just want it thin enough in those certain bulky points to be able to sew it easily. Right. So on this, I'm just trimming the bits that I've sewn to start with, and then we'll worry about the extra bits afterwards. Okay, cut these corners off. So where I've stopped sewing, I can go in with my scissors under the foam, start snipping away, and the same on this side as well. Okay. So I've reduced the bulk in that area, and then on this back at the top, can just cut away. Hang on, have I done that enough yet? Yeah, that's fine. And just go in from this mark and from this other top mark and just trim that away. Okay, great. Right, let's pop our back panel down and then add our front panel. So that's the one with our cargo pocket and flap, etc. on top, and we're going to match up all the edges. Now if you have cut 100% accurately and you have sewn 100% accurately, then these should match perfectly. If you are human like me, then just smooth out as best as you can. Just match them up as best as you can. It's okay, it doesn't matter. We'll just trim it off afterwards and nobody will know. Right, so just making sure that I am matching up the sides at least as best I can. We can always trim them down afterwards. You can trim them down now before you sew if you want. If you want to be sure that you're getting the right seam allowance, that's fine. I'm going to trim this top bit actually because I've got a little bit extra here and I want to be sure that I'm getting the right seam allowance on the top there at least. Okay, so we are going to sew along the sides from top to bottom, back stitch at the start and the end, along the bottom, back stitch at the start and the end, and along the other side. We're going to use our regular stitch length. I'm going to use our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and as I said, back stitching at the start and the end. Now my layers were slightly out of alignment there, so I'm just double checking that I have gone inside of the basting stitches. Yep, before I carry on. And I will double check that before I box the corners as well. Okay, and onto the final side. Right, so I'm just going to have a little check, and all I'm doing is running my finger down inside to see if I can feel any stitches that are showing through in the seams, only because I was not accurate with, I don't know, my cutting or my stitching, one of them. Right, just double checking. Okay, so there's a little bit here which could do with coming in just a touch, so I'm just going to go over that bit. Okay, last thing you want is your basting stitches shown on the outside, is it? Right, that is perfect now. Okay, great. So I've got a bit of extra foam there for some reason. I don't know. So you can trim this down if you want. Might as well, hadn't we? Pretend that I cut and sewed perfectly straight, just in case anybody comes into the video at this point. They'll never know, will they? Right, okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to box our bottom corners. So open out the seam allowance on your side seam as best you can. You've got the cargo pocket to contend with there as well, so just do it as best you can, and open out the bottom seam as well. I'm not doing this very well here. I think it's because I'm trying to keep it in shot for you, so I'll move it slightly and see if that helps instead. Okay, so bring the side and the bottom seam to match, and then flatten out the rest inside. As long as your seams match, then you should have a nice neat box corner. My seams do not match. Let's try that again. Okay, that should hopefully match now. Yes, that matches. Okay, so let's open up this bottom seam. I know I can open it up. If you've got fabric that's a little bit thinner, you could maybe consider pressing open these seam allowances on the bottom for a really, really neat finish. Okay, so let's match those seam allowances together and open these ones out. And then we'll flatten the rest. Just reach inside and make sure that it's all nice and flat. Oh dear, I've popped my clip off there. There we go. Make sure it's all nice and flat before we sew. That matches well, and that matches well. Great. Okay. So, my main aim on this is just to make sure that my all my layers are pointing the right way and folded nicely before I sew. Right, then we're going to sew along the bottom using our regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance, back stitch at the start and the end. So you should have found that much easier. If you haven't got a particularly strong machine, you should have found that much easier to sew without all of those extra layers in that corner. Now, if you are using really thick fabric and you want to be sure that there's not going to be any pulling in that corner, you can always do an extra line of stitching along that box corner just to reduce the pressure on it. I'm only using quilting cotton, so mine should be okay. Oh dear, I've unclipped and my layers have come unsecured. There we go. Right, let's double check on how that one looks inside. Check if that one looks okay. I think it does. Let me just turn it out to double check. No, it's what's going on here. How have I managed to, hang on, I think it's where I've caught the edge of my foam in my sewing. There we go. I just need to sew it properly the first time. Aren't you glad that I'm the one teaching this? Right, let's double check how that looks now. Oh, that looks a bit better. Yeah, much better. And I'll check the other sides, check my box corner looks good before we move on. Last thing I want is to finish construction, then turn it out and see something I'm not very happy with. Yeah, that looks great. I have got loose thread in the bottom. I'm not sure how, because I trimmed all of my loose threads as I went in order to prevent this. I've got another one there as well. How peculiar. Okay. Right, so that's our exterior constructed. We're going to get on with the strap and the strap tab. So you can either leave this turned inside out or turn it the right way out. It's up to you. If you've got a free arm, then you can turn it the right way round. If you've got a flatbed like me, then I would recommend just leaving it inside out for the minute. Let's just, before we stop though, or before we pause, let's just open these seam allowances at the top, which will make our final construction easier. I'm just going to baste across those right at the top in the seam allowance just to keep those open. And I'll do the same on this side as well. There we go. Right, so we can move on to the strap and the strap tabs next. And if you have a peek inside your exterior, you get a really good idea of what your bag is going to look like when you've finished it now. So let's move on to the strap. Right, let's move on to the strap tabs. So you should have 2 strap tabs, and all I've done is draw a line down the centre and then folded each long edge into the centre. So I end up with 1 inch by 3 inch strap tabs, or 2.5 centimetres by 7.5 centimetres. Now, the pattern also calls for some twill tape. Now, I absolutely hate it when you're carrying a bag and the strap starts getting twisted, because the strap tabs are a bit too flimsy. So I've added into this one some twill tape. Now, if your machine's not very strong, then still add the twill tape, but only add it in the centre, so keep it clear of the seam allowance on each end. Right, so we're going to cut this to be 7/8 of an inch wide. Now, you don't have to worry too much about twill tape fraying, etc., because it is woven in such a way that you can just trim it down to size, which is quite handy. And our strap tabs are 3 inches long, so I'm going to cut mine to 3 inches. Okay. Right, so we've got our strap tabs. I lost them for a minute there because they're camouflaged on my strap pieces. And we're going to open up these strap tabs. Literally all I've done is just draw the line, fold into centre and press. I'm going to open these up and pop this twill tape inside and refold it. And because it's slightly narrow, it's 7/8 of an inch rather than 1 inch, it should, that's 2 centimetres rather than 2.5 centimetres, should fit inside quite nicely. So once that's all in and folded, we'll just stitch down each edge using our top stitching length and 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. I might sew the second one at the same time actually, just to make it a little bit easier. And I'll do that for the second long edge as well. Right, so these strap tabs should have nicely finished ends, or nicely finished long edges, and we need our rectangle rings now. So you should have 2 rectangle rings. Here in mine, I'm using Emmeline again, my favourite type of hardware to use. And all we're going to do is fold this through. So you've got your raw edges here. I'm going to fold that through and meet the ends so that your raw edges are inside, tucked away. I'm just going to baste along the edge, the bottom edge, to keep that in place together. I'm going to do the same on this one. Okay, right, I'm just going to swap to my zip foot and then I will sew closer to the rectangle ring on these just to stop them from twisting around. If you'd rather, you can just put a rivet or something in there instead, but personally I'm going to swap over to my zip foot and sew a bit closer. Right, so once you're happy with your strap tabs, I'm just going to baste them onto the exterior of our bag. So if you have turned yours right sides out because you've got a flat bit, a free arm, then that's great. Just center your tabs over this side seam. So I've left mine inside out because I've got a flatbed. All I'm doing is just going to center that over the side seam and we're going to baste it into place. Just want to make sure that my strap tab is hanging down completely straight inside, it's not wonky. Okay, and I'll do the same on this one as well. And then we're just going to baste it into place along the top edge, just to hold it in place while we are attaching all the layers together. You can go over it a couple of times just to be sure if you're using a cotton fabric, but if you're using a vinyl, I wouldn't recommend going over it more than once. Right, there we go. So I've got my strap tabs attached in to the exterior of the bag, so we can pop that to one side for the minute and we'll get working on our strap. Now this bag has got a pieced strap, and you can use this technique on any bag really if you want a pieced strap. So you should have 2 pieces of exterior and 2 pieces of lining. What you're going to do is draw a line on the right side of one exterior strap 1/4 inch or 6mm away from one short end, and on the wrong side of the lining. So let's do both of the exterior pieces together to start with, and then we'll do both of the lining pieces. So if anybody remembers where I put my, oh there it is, chalk marker, there we go. Okay, so we'll just draw a line on the right side of the exterior, 1/4 inch away from one short end, 6mm, and the same on the other exterior piece. And then on the wrong side of the two lining pieces. So exactly the same, 1/4 inch or 6mm. Okay, now what we are going to do, I'll hang on to this because we're going to need this again. What we're going to do is place one exterior piece right sides up, and you can see I've got the 1/4 inch line there, and then one lining piece on top right sides down, and we're going to line these up according to these 1/4 inch lines. So you should have 1/4 inch or 6mm of exterior poking out from underneath, and you should have 1/4 inch or 6mm of lining overhanging. And let's add a pin just to hold these bits together. What we're going to do now is draw a line from where they intersect at the top here to where they intersect at the bottom. Okay, like that. Better add another pin just in case I go a bit squiffy while I'm sewing. Okay, so all we're going to do now is sew along this line using our regular stitch length, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and at the end. Okay, now before we do any kind of cutting, just fold that back and double check that it is indeed going in one continuous line and it's not pointing off in some random direction. Well, it won't be a random direction, it'll be a right angle, but if you've got it right, then it should go in one continuous line. Grab hold of your ruler and pop your ruler on that 1/4 inch line, that sorry, not 1/4 inch line, the diagonal line, the line that you've just sewn along, but put your 1/4 inch line on it. So your ruler, the 1/4 inch line on your ruler is on that line we've sewn along, and we're going to slice along here, leaving ourselves just a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to trim these triangles off, and then we should be left with a lovely two-tone strap. Ta-da! Except this is about half the length we want, so we need to repeat the process. So let's, oh excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze. Let's press this seam allowance open to start with, the seam that we've just sewn. You can also use this if you are making a bag with a really long strap and you haven't got enough fabric, or you're trying to use what you have and you haven't got quite enough fabric. You can use this technique to join two pieces of fabric together, even if it's the same fabric, but maybe your fabric is not long enough. Use that technique and piece of strap. Right, that looks great. I really like that. So now we'll top stitch either side of the seam 1/8 inch or 3mm away from the edge, using the regular stitch length or top stitching stitch length, whichever you prefer. and the other side as well. And this just helps to keep those seam allowances down and out of the way so they're not too bulky. There we go. Okay, excellent, fantastic. So let's do the same with the other pieces of strap, and then we'll join them all together. So again, with our line right sides up, and then place this one on top. Oh, right sides facing. I have done that before, done it the wrong way around. And just add a pin. So I'm just making sure that these lines are completely parallel or at complete right angles to each other, to make sure that they match. We'll draw our line intersecting or along this diagonal. Add an extra pin to stop it going walkies, and then we'll sew along this diagonal line. Now I expect if you're a quilter you want to keep hold of these little triangles that we've cut off the corners, but I'm not. I'm trying really hard not to keep hold of little scraps, so I'm really sorry I've popped mine in the bin. So I'm just cutting it off to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance, cut my triangles off. And if you've ever made bias binding, then you will know how to do all of this. It's the same principle. Okay, so we'll press this seam allowance open and then top stitch. If I can open my seam allowances. Tiny little things, aren't they? This is probably why I'm not a quilter, why I'm a bag maker. Quilting uses tiny seam allowances, doesn't it? There we go, that's nice. Give it a little press from this side as well. There we go. And then we can top stitch either side of the seam allowance, same as we did before. On the second side. Right, there we go. Okay, so we've got 2 halves of a strap. We just need to join them together. So we're going to want to join our pink to our green and our green to our pink. So let's draw a line on the right side at 1/4 inch, same as we did before, on the loose end of my exterior, and that can be the piece that we're having vertically. And then on my lining, I can draw a line 1/4 inch away. So all we're doing is exactly the same, we're just ignoring the fact that these have got a piece attached already. So we'll line up these lines, make sure that they are at complete right angles. Add a pin. And then we'll draw our diagonal line. Probably with the right end of the pencil this time. There we go. Add an extra pin and sew along that line. Now this is quite a bit more long-winded than just making a regular strap, but I do think it is worth it sometimes to have a nice pieced strap, a little bit of an extra feature. I trim the excess off, leaving just a quarter of an inch seam allowance, 6mm seam allowance. I probably could have made my strap tabs out of those triangles, couldn't I? Sorry if you're a quilter and you're shouting at me, don't throw them away, you could use them. I could have used them, couldn't I? I could have had nice piece strap tabs, but probably would have been a bit bulky in the rectangle rings maybe, I don't know. Right, we'll press this seam allowance open and then we can get on with actually constructing our strap. Press it from both sides just to make sure it's nice and neat. Okay, top stitch either side of the seam allowance 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away. Right, there we go. We've got one long strap now. Lovely. So now all we're going to do is draw a line along the centre halfway up. So our strap should be 4 inches wide. So we're going to draw a line 2 inches or 5 centimetres away from the edge. It's a little bit hard to do on my small table here, but I'll just keep moving it so that it's in camera shot as best I can. I'm just going along the entire length of the strap. There we go. Right, actually I'm going to move my tin, I think, because I don't need that just yet. Okay, sorry if that was a little bit loud. What we're going to do now, we need our iron. Again, if you've got an ironing board, then this will be so much easier than my tiny little pressing mat. All we are going to do is fold each long edge into the centre and press. And that's all I'm going to do on both sides, the whole length of the strap. So feel free to fast forward me if you get bored easily, because it's not the most exciting content. Right, I'm thinking I should maybe move my cutting mat just for the amount of steam that I'm getting on my table here. Okay, so now I'm going to fold it in half again along that centre line and just give it another press. Right, there we go. And I didn't scald myself once, which is very, very, very unusual. Okay. Right. Sorry, just move my iron out of the way, get myself back in position. Didn't think it was probably a very good idea to have all of that steam on my cutting mat. Right, so at this point we have got our raw edges folded into the centre and then folded in half again. What we're going to do now is we're going to fold it back on itself so that those folded edges are together and the raw edges are out, and then we're just going to stitch along the end using 1/4 inch seam allowance with our regular stitch length. And then we can just trim these ends, trim these corners like so. And then I'm just going to fold it out. Get my turning screwdriver again. I really must find my proper turning tool. And make sure that's pushed out nice and straight. And that will give us a nice, neat, finished end there with all those raw edges hidden inside. I'll just clip that, hold that together, and we'll sew the second end, or the other end. I say second as there's more than one end, there's only two ends on this strap. So we fold it back on itself so that the folded edges are together and the raw edges are out, and then just sew along the short end using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we'll give this a nice trim, cut these corners off just to reduce the bulk inside that strap end, and we can turn it right sides out, and I'll just clip that to hold it together. Now what we can do is sew around all 4 edges of the strap and just treat it as one regular strap. So I'm going to start around about here on the opening. No, I'm not. I'm going to start on the green end, I think. But I'm going to start on the open side. I'm going to sew along the open side, along the short end at the bottom, and back up the closed side, so that I'll sew around all 4 edges. And it'll be nice and neat, and all the raw edges will be enclosed inside the strap then. So I'm using my top stitching stitch length, and I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. Right, there we go. So that's our lovely finished strap. I'll just trim these extra threads off. Really pleased with how that looks. I think that looks great. Right, so decide which end you want to be sort of doubled up underneath. I think I'm going to have my green end doubled up underneath because the majority of my bag is green, and it'd be nice to have a bit more of the pink showing. So what you need is your strap slider, just one of these, and we're going to pop the strap through from the back like so, and then through the second section and fold it over. Now, does it say how much to fold it over by? 2 inches, so it's 5 centimeters. I like it when I put these details in my patterns because then I don't have to work it out. Right, so I folded it over and we're just going to stitch that to secure it. Except I put my clip on the wrong side. There we go. You can rivet this if you prefer. There's nothing to say you have to stitch it. Okay, so that is as far as we're going with this strap at the minute, and we'll finish it off a little bit later in construction. Okay, so once you've got your buckle added, you can place this to one side for the moment, just smug in the knowledge that you've done your strap and you are ready to attach it later. You've done the boring bit. I find strap making very boring. So I can feel very pleased that I have done that bit. Right, all that we need to do now is attach our exterior to our lining. So retrieve your exterior and your lining. My exterior I need to turn right sides out now. And I'm going to poke out my bottom corners, make sure they're looking as good as I thought they were. Yep, great. Okay, right, so what you need to do now is retrieve your lining, and then we'll attach these two together. Right, so we've got our exterior right sides out and our lining wrong sides out. I think now is probably the right time to unpick these basting stitches in the bottom of the lining. So we did steam them earlier, I know that, so that's good. So we can unpick these basting stitches. I think that's the end of them, yep. I am also going to unpick the ones in the bottom of the zip pocket as well, just so that that's done. We've got our little line of stitch holes to follow when closing these turning gaps, haven't we? Okay. Now we're going to put the exterior inside the lining, and this is going to be a bit of a tight fit, but by doing it this way, I know that you've got less turning out of the exterior to do. So I'm just opening up my zip as wide as it will go for this, just to give us a bit of extra space. Now pop your exterior inside your lining. I like my cargo pocket to be facing my slip pocket and my zip pocket to be facing the back panel of the bag. That's just how I like my pockets. If you prefer it the other way around, then please do feel free to adjust it. Okay, so matching up the side seams, I'm going to add a clip in there, and of course you've got your strap tabs sandwiched in between. And then if you marked the centres at the tops as well, then you can use that to help you match up along the top, but you should be able to ease this into place pretty well. It is a bit of a tight fit inside, but as long as it matches up along the top, that's all that really matters. You just want those top edges to match up. Okay, now the front panel is a little bit trickier because you've got all the bulk of that pocket and the flap in there as well. So if you can match your centres, I have actually got my centre marks there. You can match your centres, then it makes it a lot easier to match up. If you haven't marked your centres, you can always go back and mark them now before you do this clipping together. Now I've got a few stray threads there, so let's get rid of those before we start sewing this together, because that will come back and haunt me, won't it? And I'll be saying at the end, where did all these stray threads come from? Right, there we go. Okay, now we are going to sew around the entire top of the bag using our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance. And it doesn't really matter where you start, as long as you start somewhere and sew straight. I'm going to start in the middle of the back panel, because it's a nice straight area for me to start on. Okay, right, before I do anything, just going around and having a look, checking there's no puckers, checking there's nothing gone on. I'm going to have a feel through the lining, check that everything is as it should be on that top edge before I go any further. Yep, great. Okay, so now we're going to turn it through this big hole in the lining, which will be nice and easy because it's right there. And all you've got to do is just gently tug it out. Great. Okay. Another stray thread. This is a day for stray threads. Now, what we are going to do is reach through the hole in the zip pocket and grab hold of your lining and pull your lining out through your zip pocket. Okay, so you can ignore the exterior at the minute. So that's the bottom seam of our lining, and all we're going to do is just match these together and sew this bottom seam as though we sewed it together earlier. So when we push it back through the zip pocket, it will just look like any other seam that was sewn during construction. So we're going to use our regular stitch length, and remember we sewed this using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So that's the line we're going to sew on, and you should be able to follow the line of stitch holes. Get this lined up with the back stitching. There we go. So all I'm doing really is just sewing along that line of stitch holes all the way to the end. Right, great. Now you can finger press that open if you want. And then we can push that back through the zip pocket and tuck this lining down inside, tuck that zip pocket down inside, make sure everything is nice and neat in there where it should be. Now remember, the top of the bag is this seam here, there where we've got the zip sitting down inside the bag. So make sure everything is tucked down inside, and we'll clip all the way around the top here. And in these side seam area. Look, there's another stray thread. Gosh. Okay, in these side seam areas where we've opened our seam allowances at the top and the bottom and cut away that foam, you should find that it's not too bulky there. It almost leaves space for that bulk in between the foam there, where we've cut it away from the edge or where we've opened the seam allowances. So I'm just going around and clipping this top seam into place. Now, because I've got a flatbed, I am going to be sewing this, turning this inside out to sew, so that I'm sewing on the outside of the bag, even though I'll be sewing it from inside, if that makes any sense at all. Possibly not. Okay. Oh, I love the look of this bag already. I think it looks great. Right, so I'm just turning my bag inside out. If you've got a free arm, please don't turn it inside out. You can just slot it over your free arm and sew it like that. But if you've got a flatbed like me, then you probably will want to turn it inside out so you can top stitch on the exterior fabric. Right, now I am going to start sewing at the side seam, I think, so that my, or maybe not that one because I've got my zip and everything that side, maybe this one, just so that it's a little bit less noticeable, my stopping and starting. So we'll pop that under the presser foot, and I'm using my top stitching stitch length for this, and I'm going to be sewing at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 3 mil. Just sewing all the way around the top. Great. Oh, another stray thread. I just stopped sewing there part way around so I could snip one off. There we go. Okay. Oh, and one from the pocket as well. This must be a record breaking amount of stray threads. Right. Turn my bag back through. There we go. Okay, make sure everything's tucked in. Just have a look in your lining, check that everything is as it should be. Everything's in the right place. Everything is nice and neat in there. Great, nothing a good press can't solve. Okay, so now the last thing we need to do, well, nearly last thing, is pull the zip pocket out and close up this last turning gap. So just fold these seam allowances under along that line of stitch holes. Just folding them under. And then you can either use a hand ladder stitch to close this turning gap, or a close machine stitch. I'm going to use my machine stitch because, as previously discussed, I really dislike hand sewing. So I'm just going to use my machine. I'm going to use my regular stitch length, but just sew as close to the edge as I can while still being on the fabric. Okay, there we go. So we can tuck that zip pocket inside, smooth it out inside, and make sure those corners are nicely popped out inside, so it sits nice and flush against the lining panel. Unzip that up, just smooth everything out. Great. Okay, I'm really pleased with this bag. I think it looks great. All that we need to do now, this is the absolute last thing, genuine last thing that we need to do, is add our strap. And oh no, I really don't want to make a strap, but that's lucky because here's one I made earlier. Ta-da! Okay, now pop your bag facing towards you. Okay, so I've got mine facing towards me, and put the buckle sort of on top of the, let's zip it up a little bit actually, and then we'll be able to rest our buckle. Oh, hang on, I've got my zip pull caught inside. There we go. Be able to rest the buckle on top then. Okay, so rest the buckle on top towards your right, or my right. Okay, and then thread the loose end of the strap through the left hand ring. Make sure that this, you can see this in the camera. Okay, so we've got our buckle. We turn it round so it's facing you. So you've got your buckle on the right hand side and your loose end of your strap through this ring on the left. And we are then going to go through the buckle, or through the strap slider, and back out the other side. And I've just done that all the way to make sure that that's not twisted. And then this loose end through the second ring and fold it over onto the inside. Okay, so there's our bag. We've got our strap. Let's make it a bit smaller so you can see it all on the one camera view. And through this rectangle ring, and all we need to do now is stitch that to secure it, or you can rivet into place if you prefer to rivet. So let's make sure that that is 2 inches like the pattern says, and then it will match up with the bit on the strap slider. So all I'm going to do is just do a couple of little rows of stitching here, nice neat stitching, just to secure this into place. If you can or want to go back and add a rivet, then I think that will make a really nice additional feature to this strap. Bit of extra bling. Okay, and lots of stray threads for me to get hold of still. That will give me something to do, won't it? But that is our midi bag completely finished, with two-tone strap, cargo pocket, flap. I think that looks great myself, and a top zip closure, zip pocket, flap, and zip pocket and slip pockets. I just think that's a great bag. I think this is such a practical bag, and I hope you love it as much as I do as well. If you make one of these bags, I'd love to see it. Tag me at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H. But thank you very much for sewing with me, and I hope to see what you've made.